Hi, everyone. Hello, Jonathan. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Yonit. And, we're into the long march that is Passover. I actually always like Pesach and Passover, but there is that point where you think it's gone on quite a few days now.
How do you complained about Sukkot being too long, and you're okay with Passover being this long? How does that work for you?
And I haven't even said that we, of course, out here in diaspora have a day more than you. So that it's an 8-day long haul. I was going to say slog, but it can be, there could be digestion issues, it becomes difficult at some point. And we're at that point in the cycle. I think it's fair to say, but we are here to lighten, one may even say leaven or unleaven your intellectual diet with one of the treats of last few months. This was one of those conversations we had on Unholy that really did stay, with both of us, but I think lots of listeners as well. Kara Swisher was our guest, and she is she's basically the most influential and most important tech writer, journalist in the world, holding the tech giants' feet to the fire. But we were thrilled to have her on.
Yeah, let's take a listen to that. I think that a lot of what she said about the big tech was really interesting, and she's been, talking about this for a long time, long before anyone else was. And there were a lot of other stuff in that conversation. So let's tune in.
So we say a big hello to Kara Swisher, who is a very cool and very special guest and was described by New York Magazine as the most feared and also the most well-liked journalist in Silicon Valley. I would say, Kara, that you are basically the number one and most influential tech journalist in the world. But to pull off most feared and most well-liked, that's quite a trick.
I'm not so sure I'm so well-liked anymore. I think well-liked has ended. That was several years ago.
It's a profile piece from 2014.
Yeah, so. I think they're not so happy because a lot of the stuff I've been criticizing tech for has now come to pass, including the January 6th event, which is not at all to blame by tech, but tech helped facilitate it. And I spent a lot of time talking to legislators or at legislators and others about the implications of these inventions. And I think they've been listening suddenly in the last couple of years.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I was going to say to listeners that you and I go back quite a long while ago.
Yes.
We were both reporters, me very briefly, at the Washington Post in the 1990s, in the kind of Jurassic era, before there was all this tech stuff. What's really interesting to me is that tech was kind of tech as a distinct field, probably when you started. And I was thinking about your podcast, The Pivot, and how that over time has become more and more political, more intertwined with politics. Yeah, and that's because tech itself has kind of changed in some way.
Yeah, we end up talking a lot about politics, whether it's the FTC or Marguerite Vestager there in Europe or anywhere else. So it tends to, right now, a lot of what's happening has to do with politics because of the power of the tech companies, whether it's something like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, whether it's hacking. There's got to be legislative interest in a lot of these areas, cars, healthcare, and things like that. So tech has overtaken everything in the world, essentially. And when I first started, it was a small sidelight. These were not rich people. This was not big companies. And mostly tech people thought of was chips, chips and things like that. But it's now enveloped everything from commerce to communications to entertainment to healthcare to finance to everything.
Yeah, it seems like to the outside observer that one of your strong points has always been, not fawning over these companies and their success and the money, but rather observing it with a really healthy dose of skepticism and really examining the power structures and the social responsibility or lack thereof. And I wonder, how hard is that to do over these years? And is there any company that you look at and say they're actually getting high marks in the social responsibility category?
Well, some of them, it depends on the company, right? So I think all of them, first of all, I don't think, one of the things that's interesting, there's just been a recent series called The Facebook Files in the Journal. And one of the responses from Nick Clegg, who's from Britain, who I'm sure Jonathan knows, has been, we're not bad people. How dare you call us bad people? No one's saying, they are. That wasn't what they were saying. It's their products are dangerous and need regulation. Their products are problematic in all kinds of ways. And that's what the sweep of the Journal articles sort of is on the shoulders of reporting that had happened previously with more documents. And so I think one of the things that I try to do is I don't consider these necessarily, not some of them are not good people, bad people, but some of their products and the implications. And so I don't think it's hard at all. It's like, what are the consequences of what you made? And I think that's where I focus in on. And they don't feel very comfortable because they have to bring it back to the personal, as if they're in some, movie about a chemical company that's poisoning children. Well, they're poisoning someone, but it's not, and maybe they didn't understand the implications or the consequences. And that's where I like to focus is pay attention to what you've made and the implications of what you've made. And the problem with these people is that they started off very young and very celebrated. They get licked up and down all day. They're extraordinarily wealthy, and therefore they think everything they do is correct without understanding the responsibility they also hold for the immense power they have in the world.
You wrote your piece recently about the endless Facebook apology, as if this has gone on and on and on. And that interests me because in 2016, it all did explode about their involvement in the US election and what they'd done in terms of Donald Trump. And the idea that 5 years later, you're still having to write to say these companies are potentially, their products are dangerous, etc. 5 years has passed. Why has this not been addressed, solved, dealt with?
Well, because the regulators in the U.S., at least, you've had more luck in Europe and elsewhere in the world. But in the U.S., there's almost no regulation on technology companies or any of these companies. Now, they're starting to step in cryptocurrency, which is a relatively new area, which does need regulation, obviously. Although the people who run cryptocurrency don't think so, but too bad. Or cars, that's something people governments feel comfortable moving in on and actually throttling back in many ways. The tech companies have had none. Like, people are like, we shouldn't have regulation against tech. I said, we don't have any. There's none. There's not. There's maybe some minor data laws. But what the laws that exist protect it, Section 230, First Amendment, things like that. They're very well protected by laws. They're not hindered by them in any way.
So again, it begs the question. I mean, even lay people
Why?
right. I mean, I'm not tech savvy. I understand that there's a line between Russian propaganda 2016 and anti-vaxxers 2021. And you ask yourself, why has this not been regulated? I mean, you had a very interesting conversation on Sway on your podcast. You spoke with Dave Edgars, and he said something about, no one's going to come for Amazon because at the end of the day, people like low prices. So maybe that's true also to Facebook. You say, I know that my data is probably in jeopardy in my privacy, but it's so convenient that I don't understand the problem.
Well, that's how, the devil shows up, right? It doesn't show up ugly. It shows up convenient. It's like, wow, I can get I get mayonnaise to your home with you just thinking about it. I want a sandwich. Oh, it's there. A lot of people feel, for example, if Amazon had handled the vaccine rollout, everybody would have been vaccinated. They're incredibly efficient. They do a great job, great customer service. They're rich. They go to space, they're so successful. And so I think people have a hard time doing anything because it's all free. It's all free. It's all easy. And what I always say to them is, what do you get in your trade with these companies? You get free maps. You get your stuff delivered really quickly. You get, a calendar. You get dating. And they get everything else. They get all the money. They get all the control. They get all the data, your data. And they get to know everything about you. Non-government agencies. Nobody's comfortable with government agencies knowing all this stuff about you. These are private companies that know everything about you, information you give up willingly and not so willingly. And you are okay with that trade? You're all a bunch of cheap dates, Here's some flowers. Now I'm going to fuck with you. That's how I look at it. I don't know. I want more from them, and I want regulators. However problematic regulators are, they're elected. You can like or not like Benjamin Netanyahu or Boris Johnson or Donald Trump, but they were elected.
And you can get rid of them. Two out of the three. Tempted to say 2 down, 1 to go, but I'll avoid that. But just tell because I think
Bojo's with you for a long time.
I think so too, actually. We are the focus of this podcast is Israel, the wider Jewish world, and things. But there's quite a fit there because Israel has, prides itself on being this startup nation, high tech is a big part of that. I mean, is there a kind of secret sauce in what makes a place, you're in Silicon Valley. I think we're talking to you in
Yes.
Silicon Valley now. There is Silicon, Fen in Cambridge in England, Silicon Glen in Scotland. There's all these areas. The ones that actually work, what is the secret sauce that makes a place particularly susceptible or conducive, hospitable for a successful tech industry?
Well, there's a lot of books written about this. What creates an innovative society and what ends an innovative society, right? And so that's interesting. There's been millions of these over history, and it doesn't necessarily have to be technology. They all share the same thing: tolerance, willingness to criticize, willingness to change. A government that's flexible, absolutely, no question, and helps them, puts in research money and things like that. What ends them are wealth, expensive, closed-mindedness, that places run out of ideas and people move along. Israel is really interesting because obviously a lot of the tech comes out of the military there, and
Military intelligence,
the military,
and cybersecurity.
Right, exactly. But I think there is an element of physicality to an analog location based on something like Hollywood. But now it's changed. That's changed rather dramatically in the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now that most of these tech companies are going almost fully remote. I mean, I don't, although Google just bought up a giant building in New York, but I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens if there is going to be a place or if we're going to be able to find talent across the world, or be able to innovate post-pandemic.
The interesting, obviously, the term Israelis use this past year is unicorns. These companies, the startup companies, with the value of over $1 billion. Israel had 37 of those in 2020, which is really a staggering number when you think of how small a country we are. I went through the list of just the recent ones, and the amazing thing is there is one female founder of one company.
Amazing.
And I was wondering how, how that, I don't know what the view from Silicon Valley is, but obviously I'm sure there are more.
Same thing.
It's the same. That's so depressing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The numbers are really down because, men are smarter. I don't know if you know that, especially white men. They're better than everybody else. Sorry, John. Sorry. It's because they get funded in that level. They get encouraged. There's a lot of, if someone breaks up, goes to a company and opens another, they bring along their friends. The thing I say from the beginning, and it's been a long time thing, is they think it's a meritocracy and it's a mirrorocracy. They see what they see and then they feel comfortable with that. You can see it everywhere, on boards of companies. There's no way that years ago I wrote a lead about Twitter, which at the time was knocking itself into a wall on a regular basis, like running itself directly into a wall. And they had 10 white men of the same exact age, type, everything else on the board. And I always thought that was a problem because I think diversity brings a lot of interesting innovation. And there's lots of studies about this. I'm not trying to virtue signal you. It's just very clear that that's the case. And I wrote a lead that I think I should have retired right after I said on the board of Twitter, which has 3 Peters and a Dick. There's a problem with diversity.
Oh, that's great.
And it was, and they laughed about it, and then called me back and said, we have standards. And I said, well, where were the standards when you had this shitty board that was doing all these stupid things? Like, you only mentioned standards when it comes to women and people of color. So I don't think it does a service to these companies to be like this, but it just is. This is what it is. And it isn't because, if you said it, it's just a group of people are not just good at something and nobody else is. It's the lack of opportunity. It's the lack of access to capital. And it's the lack of belief by the powers that be in allowing people to experiment with all kinds of things.
In terms of that access to capital thing, the Israeli startups that Yonit was referring to do well out of that. And partly it's Americans who invest in them. Do you have a sense of what it is that might make an American investor think, I'll bet on that Israeli startup?
Well, it's a long history, right? Everyone pattern matches, and they have very big presence and knowledge in Israel. A lot of Israeli entrepreneurs have come to Silicon Valley. It's a very tight, circle. So I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, you have some very prominent Israeli investors, but most of the American investors understand there are certain areas where it's fertile to come there and try to find entrepreneurs. Obviously, there's so much money right now that it's really quite easy to get investments. And there's obviously the valuations are going up again.
So if there's so much money poured into the system in this country, really just huge amounts, what does it do? How sustainable is it? Are we looking at a bubble? I mean, just in Israel, the fact that there are thousands of, newly rich techies around changes society. But is it, obviously a lot of these companies are overvalued.
This isn't fresh and new for Israel. This has happened over and over again. Think about it. If you look around the world, where do you put your money, right? I mean, I think there's the world is awash in cash right now, especially the tech companies are triple in size in terms of valuation. Wow. Now, they didn't do 3 times the innovation over the past year. Trust me, they got an open market that they were able to take advantage of. There were people at home. And then who suffered? Retail, commerce, in-person commerce, office buildings. I mean, look what's happening in China right now with this this controversial company, this real estate company. I think it's Everglade or whatever it's called. In any case, there's all this money and not a lot of places to go, and so it naturally goes to tech, which always seems to do well. And there's some very clear trends headed towards us that have been proven by the pandemic that everything is going to be digitized, and to invest in it makes sense. And there's big areas like transportation, healthcare, entertainment, especially, which has had the world's biggest experiment because of the pandemic. Now people have moved that way, and now companies are thinking whether they should be hybrid at the very least, but remote possibly. Commerce has moved. Amazon has rushed into the breach, as other online retailers. Streaming companies now dominate. Movie theaters are struggling. So why not put the money there? It makes sense.
So when I hear you say all that, and it's obviously all correct, I just don't know how, in a battle of accountability where you have this digital colossus, many-headed, with huge resources and wealth and all the trends in terms of post-pandemic going in their direction, how the puny little politicians, and I would even include the President of the United States in this, can hope to keep up with them, especially because if they do move, I mean, you mentioned the British case, where the Amazon pay almost nothing in tax. They just say, okay, we'll go somewhere else. How this fight to me seems it seems biblically uneven, this fight.
Well, we did have big oil here. We had big telcos. We had big train companies. This is not something new and fresh to the United States, is these companies taking over things. And the U.S. government still is very powerful. Let me just say, I wouldn't bet against any government, really, any relatively stable government. And I use that in quotes, relatively stable, for the United States. But, President Biden has put in place some very strong anti-tech regulators, I would say. I wouldn't say anti-tech, tech-critical regulators. Lena Khan at the FTC. John Cantor is now under at the Justice Department in antitrust. You have Tim Wu at the White House. And you have a president very much interested, and a bunch of legislators, by the way, on both sides, for very different reasons, obviously. The right wing thinks they're being censored when they never shut up for a minute, which is always my favorite thing. I'm always like, Josh Hawley, you never shut up. Marjorie Taylor Greene, we wish you would shut up. We wish someone would stop you talking. But she doesn't, which is, a strength of our country. Whatever, I find her abhorrent, but nonetheless, she does get to talk. And I think you'll see some nonpartisan legislation around privacy, around data, the reform of Section 230. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems is, every other industry gets reined in several different ways. One is by taxation, another, which is a great way to sort of slow people down. Another is by regulation. But one of the best ways to rein companies in, and I hate to say this, is legal lawsuits. People can be sued, sue the bastard kind of thing. And medical device people can be sued. Financial companies can be sued. Real estate companies can be sued. Guess who can't be sued? Tech companies. Well, that might have to be rethought in a significant way. Not completely, not getting rid of Section 230, but right now they have broad immunity. And so Facebook has its CEO who is unfireable and unaccountable, who cannot be sued. What is that? I mean, come on. Like, at some point, there has to be criminal implications, there has to be civil implications for some of their behavior, and there isn't any.
So if we have this conversation in 4 years, will it be a different one, or will we still be asking the question, why is there no regulation?
I think it's difficult. Well, Facebook has more PR people. FTC was just hiring, 200 lawyers. I was like, try 2,500 you need. Facebook has more PR people. I think there's 7 PR people covering me right now, right? Wow. I don't know. No, there's not. I'm teasing. There's.
I was so ready to believe that.
Me too.
I was completely
just
ready
7?
to believe.
No, they just
what do you mean?
They don't talk to me at all, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I still shoot from my little area. I think they have hundreds. They have more PR people than the FTC has staff, and the Justice Department. They can't, and all of them do, by the way, and they have enormous money, lobbyists, and things like that. That said, I think the jig is up on with the public. I think people, the trends are showing, just like a lot of things, the damage that has been done. I think this recent I think people inside these companies right now, guess who's throwing all these documents over the wall? Employees of Facebook. Yeah. That's what's happened here. This teen girls thing, this is not a good look for a company. It's just not.
This is the effect of Instagram on the self-image of younger.
Well, of course we knew that. And it's been, I don't know what I would do if I was Facebook, but I would think hard about what they're doing. And I think people inside there are thinking hard.
But if the jig is up in terms of even the public now realizing these things are dangerous, but goes back to the Dave Eggers point, it's just too convenient to give up. What leverage, what sort of power in that arrangement does the user have? Because in the end, they don't walk away. They're not going to go off Twitter or Facebook.
They have to use these products. There's no way you can do your job today without using any of these products. So, you don't have to use Twitter, Jonathan. You don't. It's just sorry. I think you love it, right? I feel that you love it. It's addictive. I think looking into the addictive nature of these things is important. You have power to not use things. You have power to push for legislation. I think there's 2 areas that I think. 1 is liability. 2 is taxation. 3. And 3 is privacy laws, and make them pay for the data they're taking from you. Make them pay. And then see their businesses aren't quite as profitable once they have to pay for the damage they do.
But you think we should get off these platforms in terms of our own mental health?
A little bit more. I think they should make it possible. I think it's interesting. Apple just said it was going to use the devices to help study cognition and depression. Oh my God, the devices that make us depressed are going to help us not be depressed. Okay, got it. Check. And I think Apple's probably the best among them, right? Among all these companies in terms of that. But the fact of the matter is they feed off of our data. They feed off of our movements. They feed off of our consumption. And they have to be made to pay for that in a way that's significant. It's happened to opiates companies. That said, what's interesting is tech entrepreneurs and people of money are the ones paying for all this research into psychotropic drugs, which actually look like a solution to opiate addiction, which is kind of good. I'm like, thank you for the LSD, everybody, whatever they happen to come up with. But I think eventually the government will rein these companies in. I think they've been lax about it. And some of the stuff they're doing, I think, is really interesting. The space travel. Some people think it's overhyped. I think it's important. I'm ignoring Jeff Bezos' ridiculous roller coaster ride to the edge of the atmosphere. But I think some of the stuff Elon Musk is doing is interesting and important.
Not just ego trip, something important? What's the important bit?
Elon Musk, the stuff with space, how to these rockets, it's very important. He's not, if you noticed, he did not go up in a rocket ship. Mm. He doesn't need to do that. He's more interested in going to Mars and never coming back. But some of the stuff around, the car stuff is interesting. Some of the stuff around climate change. I really hope that tech will be used to sort of, help and mitigate the issues around climate change. Because in the end, that's all that matters, right? None of this is going to matter if we burn ourselves up, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see who among these technologists or who emerges across the world to come up with innovative solutions to climate change, which is, of course, the existential crisis of our time.
So that can be the redemption.
Or someone else. I think they're wasting their time sticking with each other. One of the things I always think about is there's a kid in, Somalia or a girl who has a cure for cancer in her head, right? It isn't just going to be born by computers. It's going to be born by human innovation. And the fact that they don't let this talent emerge or they hinder it is ridiculous. It's such a disservice to humanity.
We can't let you go without asking you, since we talked about Sway, but we also are big fans of Pivot. And you co-host with Professor Scott Galloway, who is half Jewish, and I co-host with Jonathan Friedland, who is fully Jewish. And I have to have your tips on a pod distance relationship.
Oh, pod distance relationship. You know what? Toleration. I say every day. Scott says he just this morning. Like I announced I was having another baby, and Scott, of course, immediately claimed paternity, and was highly offensive with a series of extraordinarily rude comments about lesbians and sperm and etc. And I just, you know what? People get super pre-offended. My wife, who is Jewish, says she's coined the term pre-offended, where people now today, everybody gets sort of up in arms. And I don't say this is about cancel culture, because I think those people who do all the hot take hacks on cancel culture are ridiculous. Some people should have, I call it consequence culture. When you do something shitty, you should pay the price. Sorry. That's the way it is. And I don't think people are hindered from talking. I think that's overblown and used as a way to make money for themselves. In any case, I'm tolerant of when he wants to say something that's maybe a little bit problematic. I think tolerance and understanding, and a sense of humor, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think those are my middle names, Yonit. I mean, the tolerance I have to extend.
You have to be like, oh, you're kidding me, and liking and being able to tolerate dissent and disagreement. I think that of course has changed rather significantly because of the internet. Everyone is instantly angry about or in the rage. But guess what? It's designed to make you upset. It's designed to put you in a rage. And if you resist it, you have a much better relationship. And I don't mean anti-vaxxers, because they can go fuck themselves. They can really, truly go fuck themselves. But I think it's more tolerant of people's different opinions and willingness to listen to them if they're reasonable. If they're not fact-based and dangerous, no, you can slap them until next, Sunday. But I think that's what with Scott, humor and tolerance, I would say.
I wanted to ask one last thing before we let you go. I know we've said that was the last one, but just because you're so fluent on what needs to be done, this is a question I often ask of fellow journalists who are very good at diagnosing the problems. At what point do you feel like you want to get out from behind the, commentary box and onto the pitch, really? And I've
created lots of companies, Jonathan. Yeah. I left the company. I left the Journal to start on my own thing. We just happened to sell it. So we've been doing this sort of, everyone's like, Substack is so entrepreneurial. We were doing it 20 years ago. Walt and I left and did our own conferences. We did our own, I started podcasts 7 years ago, because I thought it was innovative. Anyway,
no, what I had in mind was whether this talk about regulation, whether you would seek political office is what I was wondering.
Oh my God, I think Facebook would lose its ever-loving mind. No, I think I thought about running for office, but I think I'm more effective here. I think I have a better place. I spent a lot of time talking with Amy Klobuchar and Mark Warner, and I've interviewed, Lena Khan and Tim Wu, and so I think I have more power making connections for people and understanding, and then not pushing back. Like I think I did more good, like when Nick Clegg released his ridiculous latest. It wasn't even I'm sorry, I'm not sure what it was. It was a lot of words typed. That's all I could think of what it was. I think I have a lot more impact by doing that. I just do. I just think it's like impact, like having families or being gay. I think about that a lot. I have more impact having been married and having a lot of children and living our lives in a very proud and open way. And, I think at this point I was joking with Scott, only lesbians and evangelicals are having this many children, except ours are vaccinated. And that's how you do it. You just live every day. And so I think I probably have more impact doing that.
Thank you, Kara Swisher, for being in the Unholy Sukkah. We've loved it. Thank you very much.
I love Unholy. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why did you call it Unholy? I mean, I know that series on Netflix. I love Netflix, by the way. There's a company I think is.
We were there before they were, actually, the series.
Oh, were you? Okay.
On Netflix. But we called it that because Yonit is sitting in what is sometimes called the Holy Land. But we're a sort
Yes.
of irreverent
I've been
take
there.
on that, I think. Well,
Oh,
Yonit,
okay. I like that.
What's your answer to the?
Well,
why we call it
answer-
the honest answer is I wanted to call it Two Jews on the News, but Jonathan won with his title.
Two Jews on the news. Well,
But
I think Unholy was a better
won.
choice.
Yeah, okay. We
Yeah.
thought so too
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah,
So.
it's a great name. I really like it. It's a great name. I hope to get to Israel soon. I love Israel. I love coming there. And I really enjoy talking to all the entrepreneurs there. And London. Not as entrepreneurial,
No,
Jonathan.
no, very much not. Well, we would love to have you on again. Thank you so much, Kara.
Anytime. Thank you.
See, I don't want to see the whole logic for the conversation for me was to listen to her giving tips about pod distance relationships, but I thought that was very important what she said about Scott. And since we did have Scott on a few months after Kara, I just want to give us a little bit of a reminder to what he said as an answer to the same question. I have to ask you before we let you go about the podcast medium, which you have been incredibly successful in. And we also interviewed your co-host, Kara Swisher, and we asked her what her secret for a pod distance relationship was with you. And she said patience.
Patience.
So I wonder what you would say after hearing that she said patience.
Well, I'm a big fan. So, Yonit, I worked my ass off for 30 years so I could be an overnight success, courtesy of Kara Swisher. So I love working with Kara. The nice thing about, and we were going back to polarization, I'm a crude and profane person. I make all sorts of inappropriate jokes. And I think the reason that, and one of the things I believe about progress around embracing each other, people of color, people of different sexual orientations, people from different backgrounds, is I think teasing is affection. I think we'll know when we've made progress when we can make light of our differences. And one of the things that I really enjoy with Kara is she makes fun of, kind of what a jarhead fraternity boy I am. And I make fun of her around how woke she is. And we talk about each other's sexual orientation very openly and we rib each other. And I think that's progress. And also when I say something inappropriate or profane, there's a quietness and a silence. And then when she laughs, it kind of gives everyone else permission to laugh. Because I think all of us deep down find some of this stuff kind of funny. So what I really like about Kara is that she gives me cloud cover to be a little bit inappropriate. And people recognize that on the important stuff, there's a lot of people out there who are empathetic, good people, want the best for people, but still see humor, still can be crude or profane. It can be vulgar, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. So I absolutely love the partnership. It feels like you guys have a good rapport and a good partnership. The other thing that's really interesting about the medium is the medium really is the message. If someone comes up to me, I know they've seen me on TV. If somebody writes me a really long, thoughtful email, it means they've read one of my posts. The written word is really powerful when it resonates with people. If someone comes up to me and just starts talking to me as if they know me, it means they listen to the pod. Because there's something about being in someone's ears and them getting used to their voice. They begin to believe that you're speaking to them and that you have an informal relationship. And I don't know if this happens to the two of you, but there's something very intimate and familial about the podcast medium. And that's very rewarding because people come up and it's like your friendship starts at letter D. They just start talking to you as if they know you and you know them. And then they have to say, oh, wait, it's been one way. Yeah, I know you, but you don't know me. But I find the medium fascinating. I'm much more handsome on podcast. I have a very good-looking voice. But at TV, it starts to all fall apart. But I've loved it, and I've loved working with Kara.
So we have very different approaches from the two of them. I mean, she says like kind of the secret of podcasting life between co-hosts is patience. And he says just tolerating the vulgarity. I don't know. I think the first one, but does the second one read across to us that much? I'm not so sure with you and me.
No, I think we have room for improvement on that. But someone
on tolerance of vulgarity.
No, tolerance is we do tolerance. There's not enough vulgarity in this podcast. I wanted to talk to you about this. I think it's not,
It's weird, isn't it? Because we are allowed, there's no broadcasting rule. But for me, I'm just super conscious that I have my children might listen, although, chance would be a fine thing. I'm not sure they listen that often, but I worry about that. But with you, I think it's, what's the issue there? That's interesting.
No.
Because you could. But
the evening news. Are you kidding
yeah.
me? There was a point in which we talked about this being the Jewish pivot. And I remember Rom Atik was their head of the podcast department at Channel 12 here. And he said to me, yeah, I don't think you or Jonathan have a big mouth enough for it to be a Jewish pivot. So
that's true. Because it would be such a shock for people. For people to see you swearing would be like people here seeing the Archbishop of Canterbury swearing. It would just be like, that can't happen.
I appreciate
it's a law against nature. With me, it just doesn't come that easily to me. It's something we need to work on. Anyway, I think the secrets to podcasting, but secrets really for a whole lot of getting through 21st century life from Kara Swisher. What a brilliant mind she is. So that was a great addition of the podcast. We will both be back with you on the other side of Pesach/Passover. So it will be great to join you all then. But meanwhile, we will see each other on the other side.
We will.